If you're not familiar with Bowlestrek, he is a longtime Doctor Who viewer with a YouTube channel, who in the recent past has decided to come out against the Whittaker Doctor and the current showrunner, Chris Chibnall. His ultimate aim, which he admits, is to get the show cancelled. His videos are known for their almost completely negative assessment of anything that the current production team does, and in imitation of the anti-sjw YouTubers who criticize the latest movies, TV shows, and video games for their progressive ideologies, he approaches Doctor Who from a reactionary, anti-feminist, anti-social justice stance. He has repeatedly claimed that in today's culture and in Doctor Who, white men are the ones being discriminated against. Over the course of the current series, Bowlestrek, or let's call him by his name, Chris. I heard his co-host call him Chris, so I think that's his name. Because of the limited scope of his message, has found it difficult to find anything new to say. So, in his review of the story Demons of the Punjab, he has decided to descend a little bit further into the mud. He makes some claims about Western civilization in it, and because I'm a longtime teacher of Western Civ at the local college, I couldn't help but be interested in what he had to say. But before we look at it, let's talk about the story Demons of the Punjab and its moral. If you haven't seen it, it's a story set in 1947 in the Punjab at the time of the partition of India into India and Pakistan. The purpose of the partition was to give Hindus and Muslims in the area each their own country to avoid conflict, but as you might imagine, near the partition where Hindus and Muslims tended to live together, difficulties arose which led to violence. Vinay Patel, the writer of the story, did quite a bit of research to maintain as much historical authenticity as possible. The story is modeled on Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, tales like that, where a couple from two different hostile groups fall in love and they want to be together. It's got also a bit of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in it. The two groups here are the Muslims and the Hindus. Patel shows the volatility that was present at the time and how neighbors were beginning to turn on each other. The couple here, Prem, who is a Hindu, and Umbreen, who is Muslim, try their best to convince their families to accept each other. Umbreen's mother is one of those who is not in favor of the marriage, and Prem's brother also is very much against it. Ultimately, Umbreen's mother sets aside her prejudices and accepts the union, reluctantly, but Prem's brother does not. Patel's message? Not that hard to figure out. People then and now should not allow religious differences to divide families, divide communities, divide countries. They should set aside their prejudices, their bigotry, and embrace those not like them. It's very Doctor Who. It's the same message we see in Romeo and Juliet, and West Side Story, and many other tales. So what do you think? Is that a controversial message? Well, Bowlestrek is not on board with that. Let's see what he says. Now, he admits that he almost fell asleep during the episode and wasn't paying strict attention. Yet he's very quick to pass judgment, not only on the quality of the episode, but also on its moral. Always a good idea when you haven't been listening. Now, to be fair, I certainly don't want to take anything out of context here, so go and watch his video. I will put a link in the description so that you can go do that, and you let me know if you think I misrepresent him in any way.
The subject this week was the partitioning of India in 1947. A central question is, why is Doctor Who focusing on Islam? Or at least, why is Islam a central focus for this week's episode?
Was it? While the religion of the characters provided their motivations in this story, it was the people, not the religions, that were the focus. But even if Chris altered his question and asked, why are Muslims a focus for this week's episode? That's also based on a false premise. They weren't. Hindus were given equal time. His question would be similar to saying, why are the Montagues the focus of Romeo and Juliet? What happened to the Capulets? But you see, Chris has no problem with Hindus. It's the Muslims that bother him, so I think that must be why they stood out more to him. Now, Chris might say, no, in this story, the Hindus were portrayed as the baddies, and the Muslims were portrayed as the goodies. But that's just false. Prem, the main Hindu character, is one of the protagonists. he is a hero because he was open-armed towards the Muslims, and Umbreen also was a hero because of her embracing of the Hindus. The heroes are the ones who embrace the other side, and that goes both ways. And the Muslims, just like the Hindus, have bad examples in their midst, such as Umbreen's mother. Neither side was portrayed as the correct one because the story is against taking sides. I guess Chris fell asleep at that part. To portray Muslims as the true or the right ones would be to destroy the whole moral of the story. So Chris's question may have been central to him, but it certainly wasn't central to the episode. Vinay Patel is known for portraying the dark side of Islam too. His TV drama, Murdered by My Father, which won the Royal Television Society Award for Best Single Drama in 2016 and was up for 3 BAFTAs, was about honor-based violence and forced marriage within a Muslim family. I mean, come on. If Chris had done research on the writer of the story before reviewing his writing, he would know that Patel does not glorify or whitewash Islam.
Just like race, gender, and sexual orientation, I don't care what your religion is. You can subscribe to atheism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism. Your religion isn't anybody's business but your own. What I do have a problem with is when your religion starts to impact or harm other people.
Oh, good, Chris. That means you agree with Vinay Patel's message that these people should not have allowed their religion to be a reason to harm others. I'm so happy to hear you are supportive of the message. But I'm being ironic. Chris actually does have a problem with a certain religion. What we're going to find out is that Chris, he doesn't care what religion you are, just as long as you don't practice it anywhere near him.
Every religion has been guilty of negatively impacting other people of varying degrees depending on the time frame. Nobody would argue that Christianity hasn't committed many atrocities over time, and 10 to 15 years ago, many people were expressing concerns over the rise of evangelical Christianity, and for a period, atheism flourished. Then atheism got taken over by NPCs, and now we don't hear a whole lot about either movement. In 2018, we are in a completely different climate than we were in, say, 2005. It's a completely different world now.
So he seems to be making the point here that while other religions have done atrocious things in the past, and he gives a little bit of a somewhat strange history of religions in the recent past. Of course, it's not actually the religion that was doing the harming, it was the people of that religion. Would you not agree? While they have done these harmful acts in the past, today in 2018, it's a different religion that's the one that should be of concern. I wonder what religion he's talking about. We'll find out. Oh, and when he says NPC, you may be wondering what that means. It stands for non-player character. You see, the old term SJW has become so overused it's practically meaningless now, so they've had to come up with some other terms. The implication is that those who are NPCs, they don't think for themselves, they just repeat the talking points of the mob. And of course, the problem with the term is that it doesn't really indicate any political leaning, so it could be applied to anybody.
Immigration is a major concern for many people in many countries. Local populations are being displaced by people with religious affiliations that are completely incompatible with the Western world and Western way of life. Not only are people, mainly white people, being displaced, but they are told that they are evil and deficient. The white man has become the villain of choice in all NPC narratives. Why? Because it's easy. Why is this relevant to Doctor Who in 2018? Well, once upon a time, London was probably one of the whitest cities on the planet, a crime of monumental proportions in 2018, apparently. Now half the population has been displaced or removed.
Now, I recognize that it is possible that Chris might not actually believe what he is saying in this video, and is simply throwing some red meat to his base, or trying to be controversial to gain views. Or this is simply a lazy review which was thrown together without thinking about it too much. But I will give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he is sincere and means what he says, especially since he wrote it out beforehand. Local populations are being displaced by people. Where are these local populations going, Chris? Fill us in, because I'm not aware of any mass migrations out of Britain. And since you bring in religion here, do you mean Christian populations are being displaced? But you say white, So it sounds more like you're talking about race. Where are you getting this from? Oh, who am I kidding? I know exactly who you're getting it from.
London, along with other major cities, like Paris or Toronto, has become part of a massive social experiment. Completely incompatible cultures are being forced to live side by side.
Completely incompatible cultures are being forced to live side by side. Wait, before you said displaced, but now you're saying side by side. Which is it? Were they displaced, or are they living side by side? Because there's a huge difference there. You've claimed numerous times to be an egalitarian, yet you complain about incompatible cultures being forced to live side by side. I guess that would be egalitarian in the separate but equal sense of the word? You're for equality as long as certain people keep to themselves? When you say incompatible cultures, you keep using the word white. Isn't that an indication that you're talking about skin color? One skin color being forced to live side by side with another skin color? That's certainly what it sounds like.
Let's also be clear. Islam is not a race. It's a religion. Anyone of any race can identify as Muslim. This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with ideology. The progressivist agenda, however, has managed to find a way around this. We are now seeing the term racialized coming up quite often, and it is now being actively used in diversity quotas.
He's complaining that progressives have racialized religion, and yet he just did. He just said that whites are being displaced. He didn't say Christians, he said whites. He's talking about skin color.
You get a story about interfaith marriage and death, and Yaz getting concerned when she learns that there is a possibility that she might not be 100% Muslim.
What? Wait, let's listen to that one again.
You get a story about interfaith marriage and death, and Yaz getting concerned when she learns that there is a possibility that she might not be 100% Muslim.
Are you suggesting that religion is passed down through the DNA? That Yaz is concerned that her bloodline might not be pure Muslim? Wait a minute. You just racialized it again. You just racialized Islam. That's twice now. That's twice that you racialized Islam after complaining that progressives did that. Now, for people who didn't watch the story, I have to tell you this. Now, those who watched it will know this, but Yaz knows from the outset that Prem is not her grandfather. So, yeah, she's never concerned about this. The only concern that she expresses is that her grandmother lied to her. That's all. But, yeah, Chris says she's concerned she might not be 100% Muslim because she might have a Hindu grandfather. Oh, man.
In essence, governments are now giving preferential treatment to certain religious groups, which is becoming part of the replacement process. Part of the replacement process, as I've stated, is the vilification of males, whites, and Christians, while at the same time, the official line seems to be praising the religion of peace. The amusing part of this is that most NPCs have never really taken a close look at what this religion actually entails. Knowledge goes against their programming. Why is this relevant to Doctor Who in 2018? Well, the BBC, as a governmental institution, is part of this replacement process. There was a time when the BBC was the envy of the world, and classic BBC programming includes most programming up until about 4 or 5 years ago. Then it transformed, seemingly overnight. It's no longer an institution that provides world-class television. It is now nothing but a medium for propaganda. The BBC diversity and inclusion strategy was the final step in this process.
Replacement process. Let's talk about this replacement process Chris mentions here. As evidence of this replacement process going on at the BBC, Chris shows this page from the Diversity and Inclusion Strategy 2016 to 2020 from the BBC and what their goals are for the workforce. All right, so let's take a look here. Their 2020 target, all right, they would like to have in 2020 women in the workforce amounting to 50%. Oh man, this is scary stuff. What are the BBC doing? They're going to try to make 50% of their workforce women? Oh, look at, they want to make Black, Asian, and ethnic minorities 15% of the workforce. Oh boy. Okay, so let's look at this United Kingdom's demographic profile 2018. Here we have the stats. Let's just look at what the demographics are in the current year. All right, right now in 2018, what have we got? All right, let's look at ethnic groups. White, 87.2%. All right, so that means that non-whites comprise total together 12.8% of the population, right? So in Chris's chart here, the target for 2020 is 15%. That's right about where Black, Asian, and ethnic minorities are going to be in 2020, because they are growing. So 15% is right on the money, just like women. 50% is right on the money. These targets represent the actual percentages in the actual population. So let me get this straight. White men are being replaced to such an extent that they will now only represent the percentage of the population that they comprise? Oh my, this is just awful. This moaning about demographic change in society alludes to a number of alt-right talking points. The expression Chris uses, replacement process, is connected with the Great Replacement conspiracy theory popularized by Renaud Camus, which warns that the white Christian population is being replaced by a non-Christian, non-white population. Camus applied it to France, but since then it has been applied by others to Europe in general. White nationalists have latched onto the name Great Replacement because it's more palatable than the term that they had been using, white genocide. Chris may have picked up some of this material through popular anti-sjw YouTubers, Stéphane Molyneux or Lauren Southern or somebody like that. I couldn't tell you, but it is clear that he is indeed speaking of the same thing. By repeating these talking points, I guess that would make Chris an NPC, wouldn't it? There's an informative video by Sean which explains in detail the Great Replacement conspiracy theory and how the evidence doesn't support it, which I highly recommend. So I'll provide you with the link to it at the end of this video. But suffice it to say for now, it is a patently racist conspiracy theory with a bit of religious bigotry thrown in as well.
Demons of the Punjab has a single purpose, to advertise a certain religion, a religion that is incompatible with the West, a religion that many of its NPC supporters do not actually understand. Again, I fully support your freedom of religion. I don't support Horndoor's publicly funded attempts at evangelizing your religion to an often ignorant public.
Chris uses a Christian term, evangelization, here for Islam, but presumably he means proselytization, the attempt to convert someone to their religion. You know, I searched and searched through this Doctor Who episode for any type of proselytization or evangelization. Nowhere in the entire story does anyone preach Islam. There are no Muslim religious leaders. There is a Hindu one. No quotations of the Quran. No references to God. Nothing. So why is it that Chris thinks there is evangelizing going on? Chris gives the impression, and if I am wrong, I hope he will correct me, that simply by portraying a Muslim family as normal, that is, in effect, mainstreaming it. And that is what he doesn't like. If Muslims are shown to be just like everybody else, that means we'll have to accept them. And if we do, their religion might spread. You see how that might equate to evangelization in his eyes? Hey, show Muslims as terrorists on TV? I'm sure he would be fine with that, because that isn't going to make anyone want to be a Muslim. But show them, or at least some of them, as nice people. That could make them attractive. It's the normalization of Muslims that bothers him. And when he saw this Muslim family presented as normal, that triggered him. I know that makes Chris sound like an Islamophobe, and maybe he is, but we should be aware that Islamophobia is not a simple hostility against Islam for purely religious reasons. It's not merely about philosophical differences. Islamophobia often is just one manifestation of a greater fear, the fear of multiculturalism and its consequences. It's a fear of recruiting, that these Muslims are coming in to try and convert your children to their cause. Fear like this, whether conscious or unconscious, can make something that is innocent appear sinister. Many white Europeans perceive Islam as a transruptive force that through transculturation processes might be able to challenge the alleged Judeo-Christian heritage of Europe. Those who are scared are more apt to buy into white nationalist conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement process. The Pew Research Center did a study in 15 different countries. Now, Chris gives the impression that if you know about Islam, that's all that is necessary. But what they found in the study is that knowledge, whether it's a lot or a little about Islam, has almost no difference on whether someone liked or didn't like Muslims. All right. In other words, it didn't change their opinion. That's kind of interesting, right? Whatever their opinions of Muslims were, and most of them were negative, learning about Islam did not change a thing. However, when they asked them the question, did you know a Muslim? They found that the people who knew at least one Muslim, there's a huge difference in how they feel about Muslims. If they knew a Muslim, they had a much more positive view of Muslims. Right? Now, I'm sure that Chris knows something about Islam. I do wonder if he actually knows any Muslims. He can tell us that. But it does show that having a show like Doctor Who, putting Muslims in front of people's faces and showing that they're just regular everyday people, that could have an effect. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree with Chris on one thing. I think that is being done, maybe not as the primary reason for the story, but as one of the reasons of the story. They want to show Muslims as being regular, everyday folks. Videos like Chris's are fueling anti-Muslim hatred. You know what? I'm sure he knows that, and he doesn't care. In a report from the University of Exeter, from the European Muslim Research Center, it noted that the number of anti-Muslim hate crimes has been increasing year to year. And they range from like death threats and murder to just low-level assaults like spitting and name-calling. But they're on the increase.
A religion that is incompatible with the West, religious affiliations that are completely incompatible with the Western world and Western way of life.
It's interesting that Chris says this. I mean, he's not the first. It's a common phrase heard by fundamentalist Christians, white nationalists, and the alt-right. It's not something one hears from professional historians, though, because it flies in the face of the facts. It may be true that Muslims have always been a minority in Europe, but they have, in fact, contributed much to the Western way of life. Many of our customs, technologies, arts, sciences, patterns of thought have been invented, shaped, or influenced by those of the Islamic faith. Chris claims to be interested in history, so I'm surprised that he would say such a thing. I've been teaching Western Civ on the college level for some years, so I'm not simply talking out of my butt here. I don't know if Chris has ever visited, say, Spain, which of course is part of Europe, but between the 8th and 15th centuries, the entire Iberian Peninsula was ruled by Muslims. Muslims also formed a majority in southern Italy, Sicily, and Malta. Art and architecture in these areas, many of the buildings still standing, testify to their influence. Muslims have existed since the 7th century in great numbers in the Balkans, too, also part of Europe. But maybe when Chris says Western, he is restricting his definition to only France, Germany, and Britain. But even there, I mean, the pointed arch, used so often in Gothic cathedrals throughout Europe, was introduced by Muslims from southern Italy who copied the Ibn Tulun Mosque in Cairo. Westminster Abbey was built in the Gothic in other words, Saracen style. Other churches, St. Paul's Cathedral in London and the St. Charles Church in Austria, display clearly Islamic influences. Does he know that Muslim texts in philosophy, astronomy, medicine, science, and yes, religion greatly influenced European philosophers of the Middle Ages? Does he know that the reason why the Greek and Roman classics were able to be read in Europe was because Muslims preserved them and passed them on to European Christians? Thomas Aquinas, the great Christian philosopher of the medieval period, obtained, studied, and was heavily influenced by Muslim philosophers, including Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, and Al-Ghazali. And Aquinas wasn't the only Christian scholar who did so. One of the most influential medical textbooks of the European Middle Ages was Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, which was translated into Latin and disseminated throughout Europe. It became the standard medical textbook in Western civilization until the early modern period. Hospitals in Europe were established according to the Islamic design. The celebrated European universities, including Oxford, Cambridge, and the Sorbonne, were also influenced by Islamic universities. The scientific method, the very foundation of empirical and scientific discovery, originated with Al-Hazan, a Muslim who was born in Basra. He lived in the 10th and 11th centuries, and he influenced Roger Bacon, the 13th century scientist. Look at him here alongside Galileo on the frontispiece of a book by the Polish astronomer Hevelius from 1647. The number system that we currently use, often called the Arabic numeral system or the Hindu Arabic numeral system because it was invented in India but was passed on to Europeans through Muslims, we got it from them. Muslim math books greatly influenced our own practice of mathematics. The guitar, invented in the Muslim world, it was called the kitara. Did you know the notes on the Western musical scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do? That comes from Arabic. Yeah, and the cry, ole, comes from Allah. So next time you say ole at the game, just remember, you're calling out the name of Allah. Did you know that the French croissant, and this is no lie, is modeled on the Islamic crescent symbol? Yeah, it is. Now, I'd better stop there before Chris accuses me of proselytizing for Islam. I merely state these facts to show that Islam has a claim to a portion of Western culture. Maybe not most of Western culture, but definitely a part of it. But maybe that's not what Chris meant. Maybe he wasn't talking about whether Western culture owes anything to Muslims. Maybe he meant that Muslims themselves just don't fit in. They don't mix in very well. They have too many beliefs that put them at odds with the rest of Western society. They're not likely to be patriotic or loyal to their country or something like that, presumably because of their religion. Maybe he means that. Did you know that by the 1920s, the British Empire, which controlled a large portion of the world, had about half of the world's Muslim population in it? Yeah, and because of that, during World War I, more than 400,000 Muslims fought as soldiers in the British Indian Army, fighting on the side of Britain. And 500,000 Muslim soldiers of the British Indian Army fought for Britain against the Nazis in World War II. So much did they distinguish themselves as loyal to the throne that the British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, said, we are the greatest Mohammedan power, Mohammedan means Muslim, Mohammedan power in the world, and 1/4 of the population of the British Empire is Mohammedan. There have been no more loyal adherents to the throne and no more effective and loyal supporters of the empire in its hour of trial. Today, there are 3 million Muslims living in Britain, most of them coming from South Asia, many from the rural parts of Pakistan and Bangladesh. They came to Britain between the early 1960s and the early 1990s. And there were, yes, difficulties for them in settlement, and in some of their demands, too. But this didn't arise really from their religion, but simply from their unfamiliarity with the modern Western way of life. But please note, there's a difference between having to adjust and become accustomed to a way of life and being completely incompatible with it, as Chris would have you believe. By and large, just like Christians and others, Muslims in Britain have shown considerable respect for equality, freedom of expression, tolerance, peaceful resolution of differences, and respect for democratic values. Among British Muslims, Islam is being increasingly interpreted in a manner that brings it closer to the central values of the British democracy. Yeah, you could even say that a distinctively British brand of Islam is emerging. Just as in France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Spain, they're all throwing up their forms of Islam. The British form of Islam, obviously, clashes with some aspects of the Islam that the immigrants initially brought with them. And so, yes, Muslim media and the mosques wrestle with these conflicts, and most Muslims in Britain favor a democratic reading of Islam. So as the Muslims reap the benefits of multicultural societies and their youth absorb Western culture, their attitudes to multicultural society are going to become more and more positive over time, as they are already doing. What does that indicate, Chris? It indicates, yes, say it now, compatibility. History shows that religion is elastic. Religion does not operate in a vacuum. All right? It's mediated by other factors. Hindus were told that their caste system would not allow for democracy, and yet somehow India has sustained a democracy for over half a century. Christians, who now claim to be the natural friends of democracy, were for centuries against it, but they came around. They used their Bible to show democracy to be bad, but now they show it to be good. So that's what happens to religion over time. But by insisting that members of a certain religion do not fit into your culture, you are in effect saying, you're not one of us. We don't want you here. You are, in fact, making yourself incompatible with Western values. Sure, you can say, hey, I believe you're allowed to be whatever religion you want. But if out of the other side of your mouth you say, but you should keep your religion out of my country, you demonstrate that you do not truly believe in the freedom of religion in your country. If we're going to make a statement about compatibility, let's say this. Islamophobia is incompatible with Doctor Who. It cannot exist in our fandom, not only because it contradicts the general message of the show since its inception to show respect for those not like us, but it alienates part of the fan base because of their religion. I hope that Chris will reconsider what he said and apologize to Muslim Doctor Who fans in Britain and around the world for making shallow, sweeping remarks and abstract generalizations about them and for fueling anti-Muslim prejudice. At least let's hope he retracts his statements and offers a sign of goodwill. On the plus side for him, maybe I've given him some new material and he might be able to get another video out of it that doesn't just have to be the same old whining and complaining.